has a monopoly on the truth. Our version of our own truths are based on our own lived experiences. In this space, we welcome different perspectives to learn, unlearn, and enlighten. Welcome to The Lantern. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Lantern Podcast. I'm so excited to be joined by Elizabeth Elfenbein, who is the founder and CEO of a US-based social enterprise under the Sisterhood. Elizabeth, welcome to The Lantern Podcast.
Wow. Thank you so much for having me, Khanyi. I'm really excited to get under the hood and talk about things with you today.
Cool. So, as a point of departure, do you want to just give a brief introduction into who you are? I have changed and sort of let the guests introduce themselves on the podcast because I just think there's so much power in you telling your own story. So, who are you, Elizabeth?
Well, first of all, I appreciate that. That's really wonderful. So I'm Elizabeth Elfenbein. I'm the founder and CEO of Under the Sisterhood, which is an intergenerational social impact organization. And what's really exciting about what we've been doing is that we use stories at the core to educate, to inform, to inspire action, and to build community. And in the process of doing that, we launched on August 26th in 2022. And we're almost 3 years now. We've built a women's health platform under the hood of women's health. And we also have a non-for-profit arm called Sisterhood. And we go into underdeveloped communities and we build sister leaders and sisterhoods. And right now we're currently in Liberia, steeped in creating vocational programming, as well as we're in Ghana building leadership programming. The other thing I'm the founder of a mission-driven health equity agency called Otherhood. And that was a recent rebrand. And I share that because they're all interconnected. We're living in unprecedented times in the US. And as I was thinking about what I've been doing for the past decade, I have been giving voice to all kinds of communities, if you will, from caregivers with a number of social platforms and documentaries to the aging population, where we created a social movement called Aging with Attitude, and then building out under the Sisterhood, where I've had the great fortune of getting under the hood of women from ages 11 all the way up to ages 88, really understanding what it means to be a woman in today's world, as well as all kinds of health conditions. And in the process of in doing those different ages and the different, intergeneration, if you will, I've had the good fortune, as well as going into communities like Black, Indigenous, people of color, like people living with disabilities, really the caregivers dealing with special needs children. And lastly, looking at the LGBTQ plus community and really giving voice to these communities. And I think that the underpinning of all of it is really stories at the core and giving voice to wonderful other communities. And so now really moving forward, looking at Under the Sisterhood and Sisterhood, and really how can Otherhood agency really serve other communities in such a way that gives them voice and makes them really feel seen, heard, and celebrated. So that's pretty much my story. One quick thing, prior to that, I was a leader in advertising, a chief creative officer and partner, and I left the industry in 2017 to start digging in and getting into communities.
Wow. I mean, when I was listening to everything that you get up to, I was wondering, do you sleep?
Actually, I sleep pretty well. 6 to 7 hours a night. It's funny that you say that. Yeah, I do want to say something about that. I am definitely a maximizer of my time. And I think that, I'm really happy to be having this conversation with you because you are so about self-care. And self-care is at the core of how I'm able to do all the things I love to do and how I try and make a difference in the world. You have to start with pouring and having a cup that's full. So I get that.
So now that you mentioned self-care, what does self-care mean to you, and what are some of your favorite self-care practices?
Wow. Well, I love that question because what it means to you, like you can talk about the checklist of things you do.
Mhm.
Um, but it's very deep for me. And I think, it was in 2017 that I left the big job. I ended up getting in a terrible accident, believe it or not, bicycle accident. And in the recovery of that and some other big significant changes in my life, I was always pretty good at exercising, but exercising, I didn't think of it as self-care. And so what I would say is what was interesting to me was taking the time to look inward and really look inward and go on a self-discovery journey, and then look at self-care from all the different, there's what, 8 different modalities of self-care. I was always good with the environmental, like, finances and stuff, whatever. But the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, probably
Mm,
really have been working on that. So what self-care means to me is it's really about creating practices and routines that allow me to show up as my best self because I take the time to go inward, do the work. And so, for instance, when you ask, like, what are some of my favorite things? I have a daily routine that if it's just disrupted, I'm not in an awful space, but it serves me beautifully. So I do transcendental meditation twice a day. But like it starts with how I wake up in the morning. I wake up and I do like at least three mindfulness breathing exercises, usually box breathing, before I even get out of bed. And then I do some a little bit of movement to awaken my extremities. And then I get out of bed. This sounds crazy, but making my bed is part of my self-care routine because it's how I want to enter the bed later, is really the structure. And there's a great book out there, which is Make Your Bed by some admiral from the US. It's really a wonderful book. But so I make my bed and then I put coffee on and I meditate for 20 minutes. And after meditating, I go and I take my coffee. I have an egg, I take my coffee. And when it's really cold out, so in the US below 32, like I'll go out with mittens on. I live on the water and I'll walk down the pier and I will sit and I will write in a journal. So I have a pink journal. This is my work journal, which doesn't have, but I write in it every day about gratitudes. And so it's not that we all don't have stories and have challenges and what have you. I try and even the self-talk is focus on the good things because it's
mm,
easy to focus on what isn't. And so for me, self-care is that time to really reflect. I used to be in such a chaotic my life. I worked in New York City for 30 plus years. My life was very, very chaotic, raising 3 children, having a big job, the demands of the job. And so taking this time to slow down, even though I work quickly, but slow down and be in solitude and in spirit has been really for me, that's what self-care means. And then doing it routinely. So it's like I don't do it for 2 weeks and then, oh, I've done it, I'm good. This is it's part of like having coffee every day. You have your certain routines in place that serve you and create, my previous therapist would have said, you're very sturdy. You have a very strong infrastructure. And so I think by doing things like self-care and doing these routines daily, you are creating a scaffolding within that allows you to go and serves you in the external world.
I love your answer, and particularly the last part that you mentioned about it being scaffolding. I think that's a
Mm,
beautiful way of thinking about it. And thank you for sharing your own definition with us. You said so many things prior to that as well. So I also wanted to ask you about, why do you think it's important to have an intergenerational platform when it comes to exploring health, and particularly women's health, as you're focusing on?
wow. Kanye, great question. Oh my goodness, this is really deep. And it's interesting when I started the company, I was like, I wanted to be a global community, women of all ages, and I didn't attach the word intergenerational. I just said all ages, all inclusive. This is going to be the belonging community where everybody feels like that they are important, that they matter, that they're included. And over time, and I had conversations, one of my strategic advisors at the time was like, "Are you sure that's like broad, that's going big?" And I'm like, "Yeah, because, like, there's multi reasons. Start with inclusion. When people feel left out, there's, in terms of lack of healing, there's a lot of trauma attached to that. And I've had that happen in my life at a very young age. So, but as it relates to intergenerational, so one is inclusion and feeling that's where it began. The origins is I wanted to create a community of belonging, that everyone felt welcome. I have daughters, so in their 30s. I have a stepmother who's 81. I value. I have a sister. I have nieces. I have actually a 10-year-old niece and a new grandbaby. But I think the reason why intergenerational is so important as it relates to women's health is that we're going to be on a journey, a health journey throughout our life. We're going to go through all these transitions. So at first you start out as a child, then you go through puberty. Things start happening. You move into adolescence. You move into the reproductive years, into perimenopause, menopause, and post. And what's interesting about that as it relates to intergenerations, and this same advisor said, well, someone who's going through menopause doesn't really care about someone going through puberty. And I would argue I disagree, because if you look at, like, my daughter had her baby, her pregnancy nearly mirrored my pregnancy with her. So when you start looking at these, the DNA, the genetic, the family history, when young girls at puberty, they start getting their period and they have heavy periods, you can also almost predetermine that they could be at risk for endometriosis or fibroids. You have to follow and look at these family patterns. And so I think that for me, what started out was creating a community of belonging and inclusion and wanting all ages. As we got into the health side of it, when we launched our Under the Hood of Women's Health platform for every life stage, I started to say, no, the importance here is I've interviewed 75 women, 75% to 50 women were working in women's health in very specific silos. And which is wonderful. Fertility or menopause or postmenopause or period pain, great. And it made sense that they were siloed for what they were. But if you look at the woman's continuum, a woman's health continuum, me solo, and I think about, I got my period at 15 and the expressions of the period over time, and then what it meant for having babies, then what it meant for, perimenopause, all the different things in life, they are so interconnected. And so it got me thinking that, it isn't just about belonging. This is about creating an intergenerational platform. And then there's the other side of it. So you asked specifically about health, but I would be for naught if I didn't say there's the other side of the intergenerational that's meaningful. When you connect, and I had a great interview with a woman by the name of Sydney Peck. Sydney created this intergenerational community. When you create intergenerational connections, there isn't just the shared wisdom and experiences, but there is so much healing that's passed along through those just moments, those micro moments where we connect as human beings. And so what I have found is I've always been attracted to people. So it hasn't really mattered what age. Like when I met you, I'm like, wow, she's so cool. I want to know more about her. And so I felt like that was really important as well, because you get diversity of thought. So like, I think there's so many ways of looking at diversity. And for me, it is about the quality and quantity and the differences in people that are shared and celebrated and beautiful. And that you can, and so I think that you only get that when you look at intergenerational, when you put people who are, 20 together with someone who's 75. I mean, and not for business, just for a shared moment. Beautiful things and magical things happen. You re-inspire the person who's 80 or 70 or 60, and then you inspire the younger generation to be like, wow, that's possible. Look at what they accomplished in times that are different than my times. And it's kind of a multifold answer. I hope that's okay.
I love that. And, I actually now want to ask you about intergenerational war in terms of the mentality, because I don't know if you follow, some of the older generation's perception when it comes to the younger generation. To me, it seems like your perception of the younger generation is quite positive. You see them as people to be nurtured, people to be guided. Whereas I think there's some older people who are quite critical of them, whether it comes to how they choose to live their lives, health, maybe not understanding that we are living in different times. We don't have the same job prospects, anxieties at an all-time high. We've obviously got digital platforms now that keep kids busy. So what would be your view when it comes to maybe older people whose perception is not as positive as yours when it comes to forming platforms or being guides to young people these days?
Well, I think that that's a tricky question and a good question, by the way. So coming at it freshly, I would say that I look at people on different continuums, and when I say that, you have people who are in denial, and then you have people who are self-directed, and then you have fence sitters. Of course, there's steps in between. But you're not going to get people who are in denial to suddenly be open to this new generation. You're not going to convert them because that's not where they are. But the fence sitters, you could get them to maybe open their mind and say, wow, it is different. There are different times. And I feel for this generation. I will tell you that, I've had personal lived experiences. I mean, I came from the older generation. I would say my father and mother, who are no longer here, but my mom was an artist and a social worker. My dad was a doctor, and he was of German descent, and he was very sort of, this is what you do and this is the way you live. But I think over time, before he passed, he was like, he saw the way I showed up, did my job really well, and was a mother, and he opened his mind to, there are many different ways and different paths you can take. It would still be hard. He was not a fence sitter. He's probably a little on the other side, but because of our relationship, I was able to say, but for me, I think with him, it was more showing him. My actions showed him. I showed up in integrity. I was a wonderful, I was a good mother. I should be careful if I say wonderful. I was a good mother. I raised three wonderful, wonderful people, humans. I did my job really well. I showed up as a professional every day and worked really hard. The work ethic was there. So by showing him, he was open to it. I think as it relates to older people in general, and I don't know what ages you're talking about, I think that there are people, look at the divided country of the US in terms of the mindset. I think that it's going to be hard to convert that mindset that isn't open to the fact that it's a different time. And, I always say that, these younger generations are more socially conscious. They are less consumed about success is defined by material and wealth, monetary wealth. They look at wealth more spiritually at times, more from a social consciousness. So I think that think it's going to be hard to change people. I think that you have to witness it and be open. And so I don't, I think that all we can do is do good and be open. I mean, I have three very different children. I have a daughter who you met, who, went to Yale, was, Wall Street, very successful investment banker, a business analyst, took, was part of DoorDash and what have you. And one day she said, you know what? I'm not happy. She started taking yoga teacher training, and she started on a different path. So I could choose to be like, well, Georgia. And she said to me, Mom, are you upset that you paid for so I said, no, if you're going to become a medicine woman, people are going to be much happier that you are highly educated and went this route. They're going to be able to say, hey, clearly there was an inflection point in her life that made her decide to go, because it's a road less traveled, and roads less traveled are hard. But what I decided as a mom who've had, is that, like, you have to lean into what makes your children happy. You have to lean into the next generation, what makes them happy, and know and believe that because you've raised them well, that they will do things that both matter, that will be able to support and be self-sustaining. For me, if they can be self-sustaining, they don't have to live the life that maybe they lived as a child, a more entitled life. Maybe, things are different. And so I hope that answers, that's a really tough question.
No, it really does. And you answered it beautifully. And thank you so much for using your own personal life as an example, because I think that will resonate with so many of our listeners. I think we don't have enough thought leadership out there when it comes to this. What they're calling it is an intergenerational war. Because I think some of the older generation are quite harsh when it comes to the younger generation. They're not necessarily understanding that the opportunities are just different. It's just a different time. But I am curious as to, why do you think you are more agile in the mind? Do you think you've always been that way throughout your life, or was it at the inflection point when you had your career pivot and then started leaning inwards that you started seeing things differently?
That is a really, really deep and good question. I would say a couple of fold. I mean, I went off to art school. I was always different. I was always another. No, I was always different. But when I brought three children into the world, you know, I wanted them to have good lives, lives of meaning, lives of purpose, lives that mattered to them. Would I say that I equated success to, arriving at some sort of job at a certain level? Not necessarily. I always just wanted them to be happy. So, I think it's tough. I mean, I think that part of it is who I am, but I think the past 7 years since I left it'll be 8 years in November, at the end of November. I think that I have been a lot more open to, because I see things differently. My prior life, even if I was relatively successful and on stages and stuff, I didn't feel things deeply because I was on autopilot. I was trying to get everything done. And I think that when you are managing a career, a career that is growing, and you're on stages and you're trying to manage three lives and giving your children a good life and trying to show up when you are there, because time is more limited. I think that you tend to put more structure in place and see things in a little more structured way. And so I think that is a good question that you asked, because I think the 7 years have allowed me to see things differently. My eldest daughter, who Olivia, she went a very alternative route. She got very good at a sport and became a professional athlete, I would say at 15. And so she never went to college. So right there, I had to shift my thinking. Like, I always knew that she could do something in the sport she was in. She represented our country for 16 years. But interestingly, she didn't go to formal college. She's an avid reader, and she speaks on behalf of, she's on the board of the US sport she's in and all of that. And she's a speaker for the women's team. So she's the one that, having not gone to college, she's a speaker, brilliant. And so understanding and having a child, and all three kids had different, like, incredible strengths. Listen, all kids do. I'm only speaking about mine. But having to accept that and say, you know what, this is going to go an alternative route, and just let her know that I believe in her, I support her, and I know that she's an incredible human being, more than her successes, more than the medals, the things she's won, the stage, whatever. And that, I think I said that the other night. I think the greatest thing is allowing you to see your children for who they are and celebrate them in that. And so I did that. And then with Georgia taking a different path, an alternative path, having been in a corporate structured path, just saying, hey, listen, be happy. I trust you. I believe in you. You're so friggin' smart. So you will make good decisions. I know you will. And if not, you pivot, and you have that good, you pivot. If you are unhappy, you figure out what's next. And then with my son, he's had a very interesting journey, and, he's in the LGBTQ plus community. He has struggled, and he's coming out on the other side. And what I would say to you is, I've always been open-minded and open-hearted. My kids, I'm like, my job as a parent is to give a runway for you to show up and do the things that help you shine and bring your magnificence to the world. And so I guess, to answer your question in the long run, I think I was always that way, although I had a sort of a more fixed mindset when they were younger, but have grown into, really celebrate. I've always celebrated them, but even more so now.
I love your answer. And honestly, I think Everyone would wish that you would be their parents because,
Mhm.
I think what you've said there is just so beautiful. Because I think a lot of kids aren't necessarily feeling seen or celebrated because they've deviated from the traditional routes, even though it's quite clear that those routes might not necessarily be yielding the ROIs that they used to. But I think some parents are still quite rigid. They're not understanding this is maybe the time to lean into purpose. So let's now talk a little bit more about purpose. Would you say that you've always been as conscious about your purpose? Because you said you've always been a little bit different, you're always artistically inclined. Do you think that you've always leaned more into that? Or when you initially chose your career, you were more thinking about stability, maybe a traditional path, stability? Maybe take me through those
Wow.
initial years and how you actually decided to go on your initial career journey.
Well, I have goosebumps because I have been so alternative my entire life. So I went off at 17. I went off to Pratt Institute in New York, in New York, in Brooklyn, New York, the main campus. I moved from outside of Philadelphia, and I was really young, and I loved art, and I kind of found my people. I never fit in when I was in high school. I went to a public school, never fit in, never felt comfortable. And then I went off to art school and I found my people and I started getting really in to showing up and being as good as I could at the classes I took. And when I left, so I had 4 years at Pratt. And when at the last year, they had a senior exhibition in Manhattan at the Puck building. So they had called it the Puck Show, and we literally each had, so 200 of us had walls, and we got to show our work, and the community, the advertising industry, came in, design, what have you, and started giving us interviews on the spot. And so I immediately, even though I was a graphic and package designer, immediately got courted by the advertising space and bringing in my design skills. And what was interesting is I did take a course in advertising. So what happened was I had no plan, Kanye. I mean, this is back, I don't want to date myself in the 80s, but I went out and I sort of followed the things. My life sort of unfolded and manifested in its organic way. And what happened, I think the thing that the consistent through line for me was creativity and like crazy work ethic. Like
Hmm.
I showed up, I didn't leave until I was done. I did my best. I put the care, the attention into everything I did. And I was really strong minded and strong willed at a young age, kind of like, I don't want to say cocky, but very confident. And so what happened was I just kept my career sort of, I went into one agency, another opportunity came, and it sort of just everything sort of began it manifested on its own based on my
Hmm.
work, based on someone hearing about me. Another opportunity unfolded. And and I saw myself, because one of the things about coming in as a graphic designer and a package designer, your ideas are like, from a design perspective, you can see things more, whereas like with advertising people, it's you come up with the ideas and you bring in other people to come in and execute. You still, I still do that, but I can
Hmm.
see the graphics. Anyway, I was fortunate because it was very consumer focused. And so I got the opportunity to work across all kinds of industries with big blue chip. I mean, I worked on Citibank for many years, on MetLife, on Wall Street Journal, on Delta Air. Like I worked across the gamut, Microsoft. And then I fell into health and wellness for a long stint, for probably 20 years or a little more,
Hmm.
becoming consumer healthcare expert, as well as working across other customers. And when doing the work I did with all the, I would say, the big blue chip, the Delta Airlines, the Citibank was a great thing because they had a really different campaign out there. It was about living richly. So it
Hmm.
really got into life. It wasn't about money isn't everything.
Yeah.
It's like a means to an end, but it's not everything. And so we were able to get into lifeisms, which allowed us to think differently. But it wasn't, I would say that was probably, that and MetLife, the more satisfying work, because you
Hmm.
could get into life more richly. It was called Live Richly, was the tagline. But then when I moved into healthcare, I recognized that I could make a greater difference and greater impact. And so my career sort of sort of unfolded that way. And again, a lot of hard work, a lot of people hearing about the work I'm doing, opportunities happening because of it. And so things sort of unfolded. What I would say is I had no grand plan. And it's interesting, when I was a chief creative officer at my last company, the young kids would come in and they'd say, I want to be a creative director by age 30. A guy would say that to me. And I'm thinking, I was pregnant with I had my first baby at age 30. And I just wanted to make a paycheck to pay for the nanny, to support my ability to support my family. Like, I wasn't thinking about what's next.
Right.
It literally, my career. So I think that the message here is like, work hard. And you asked was I living my purpose? What I would say to you is, I've had a wonderful career. I am so fortunate. I'm a creative. I got to do the work I love to do. I didn't always love every aspect of the work, but I showed up at least pretending to love every aspect of the work. No, I really did, because I think that if you don't like it, then you're not going to
Yeah.
show up. So, but what's interesting about getting into purpose, I would say, my last company, it was an independent health and wellness company, and the owners were really generous. They invested in my ideas, because my job was to oversee, say, 100, the creative team, and make sure their work was great, and do client work and do pitches. They also wanted to be known as a company of innovation. They wanted to win awards. And oftentimes you have to do that with other ideas. And so I was fortunate, because I would bring an idea every year after Christmas, like New Year's, I'd come in and say, this is going to be the idea. Let's invest in this. And so because they invested in my passion projects, that was when the
Mm.
purpose began. So, for instance, in 2013, I launched a happiness app called Happy Fuel. And we did that for 3 years. We won so many awards, OMA All-Star, what have you. Very hard to get into that market. That was before Calm and Headspace, but it was a
Mm.
fantastic app, beautiful, won all kinds of design awards. And that began my sort of mission, other than a few client things. And I continued to build on that then with Caregivers Speak Up, and then, going out and creating a day in the home of the caregiver, and, under the Sisterhood. And what I would say is that was the spark. The inflection point was the investment in these passion projects that I felt would, at the time for the blog, would help set that company up as a most innovative company by doing these
Mm.
projects that no other organization was investing in or doing. And so I had the good fortune of being invested in. And then I got this, like, I was ignited. And that was, after 10 years at that organization, they were so generous and invested in so much. I had the opportunity to go and say, you know what? I want to go into more communities and see what I can do. And I was fortunate when I went to Comcast and did another series, a docuseries, A Day in the Home of the Caregiver. Comcast at the time was serving 85 million American homes. I'm sure they're in more now. But interestingly, being a self-insured organization of over 100,000 employees, you have caregivers of, young mothers who are caregiving for children, of aging parents, of, siblings and children with disabilities. And so it really behooved them to go on a listening tour and get
Mm.
get in the homes, a day in the home of the caregiver. And so it was all these things that and it wasn't until recently that I started to say, wait a minute, I've been in all these other communities. When I left with the team from Comcast, and they started Cherish, and was able to help both the branding, the naming of the organization, but really create this movement called Aging with Attitude, and get into the attitudes of people, caregivers of the aging, and then the aging population. Again, it continued to bring out this purpose in me. And so I think that, to your point, the purpose probably was ignited in around 2013, maybe 2012. And I think it's because I left a big multinational organization, 2007, going into a startup and starting up that company, and then being part of a company that was independent, allowed me to, in some ways, and it wasn't intentional at the time,
Mm.
but it allowed me to get and become known as innovative. We had to be inventive, and we had to experiment. So, and I experimented in places of purpose. How can I change the gross national happiness quotient? How can I give voice to caregivers? And and to the aging population. How do I see them? How do I see other people in marginalized communities under the sisterhood? How do I ensure that whether you're, in the LGBTQ community, you're a woman of trans background, you're, a woman of color, no matter where you are, that you have a space that sees, hears, and celebrates you, acknowledges it's really important, and then celebrates you. So I think the purpose was, yeah, about then. That was a long-winded answer.
I'm not gonna lie, it really was. But I'm still curious to know, you seem to care about people being seen, acknowledged, heard, and giving voices to people. Why do you think that you care about that? Because I mean, you could care about a whole bunch of other things. You could have loved to just, do what you were doing before. But why do you think you really wanted to go into community and give voices to the people that you currently are focusing on? Why is that
All
important
right,
to
I
you?
am seriously in goosebumps right now. You're outing me. I think that probably on a personal note, not feeling seen and heard and celebrated. And I would say probably as a child, not feeling seen and heard, coming from, I'll give you an example. I came from a divorced family. My father would take us on the weekends. He'd play sport at a club, and the boys they would be behind a mahogany door, and I'd be waiting on the other side. So I was
Mm.
literally not seen and not.
Mm.
And even the family, and I adore my brothers and I have a half sister. I adore my family. But even the family dynamics in terms of who has the voice, even today, as we've aged, it's really interesting. And so I think that probably subconsciously has a lot to do with it because I've always recognized that in others who have felt unseen and unheard. But it's probably baked into. And then I think, just, in maybe my home life didn't feel seen
Mm.
and heard, you know, in my former marriage, if you will. And so I think, I felt more seen and heard on the job because I had to be. That was my job, to be seen, heard, and acknowledged. But it's a tricky thing. And so I think I'm also an empath. So when you're an empath, you see people, you hear people, you take on the things that they're going through. So I naturally
Mm.
do that on top of my own feelings. And so I think that, yeah, that was probably the impetus.
You said now that you take on other people's feelings and that you have that empathetic nature. How do you manage experiencing all those emotions? Because I mean, some people are emotionally unavailable and repressing their emotions, and you're on the other end of the spectrum where you're feeling it everything all at once at the same time. Take me through your emotional regulation process.
Well, I don't know how to answer this question. This is a good one. I would say that I was probably a little repressed. I mean, 7 years ago, I also got a divorce. So I think that suddenly my voice is out there. I don't really necessarily openly speak about the details or anything. Um, but I did the things I did throughout like my life, my job. I had a big voice there. And I think that maybe because I was able to have a big voice on the job and feel really seen there,
Hmm.
that sort of was enough for me, even though I didn't feel as seen at home. And so so what I would say is I suppressed a lot. I suppressed.
Hmm.
I absorbed. And so you asked like how do I do that in terms of everything all at once. It's really hard. I think that because now it's like 7 years that I've been meditating, doing all of these self care modalities allows me to be able to absorb and know when. I was never good at creating boundaries, and I wasn't good at understanding others' boundaries. I just went at the things I needed to get done to get them done and not understanding them. And now I understand them. And sometimes I still make mistakes. I'm human, but I will always catch myself and say, "Oh, I think I have to like, I'm sorry, Mom didn't mean to do that. Mom, please forgive me." But I think in terms of taking stuff in now, I've learned how to let go of the
Hmm.
things like support where I can support. When it comes to your family, I think as a mother, there's like nothing you wouldn't do for your children. I love my children they are the loves of my life. So I would do anything for them, but that means absorbing a lot. And sometimes
Mm,
I have to say, you know what? No, it's okay. They'll be okay. Trust in them, believe in them. And so I think that's one thing as it relates to humanity and the work I'm doing. You
mm,
know, I've been fortunate in the women I've connected with and interviewed, the community we've built. But people have hard stories and hard lives, and
mm,
I want them to feel when they have this time with me that they matter in a deep way. And so I take it on, and I take it on probably after every conversation I have. It's with me forever. So a couple of women, we had our celebrating women making history, a couple of women who I met in really random places who I interviewed, who've had really challenging lives and who have shown up in ways that are just unbelievable,
mm,
came the other night, and I was able to just see them in their wholeness and like know that. But like it sticks with me. I am able, after a call, it will probably be with me deeply for about a week,
mm,
and like can be in my subconscious. It could be I don't dream so much, or maybe dream a little less lately. But then I'm able to, like, it starts to diffuse with time, things sort of diffuse, but they're always in me. And so I think it's important, like when you make these connections, I don't take it lightly. Like I'm not one who makes small talk. And so, taking on, and there's another thing, just to address that comment even further. There is so much in the United States right now. I would say, how do I take on what's going on?
mm,
Um, I was just on a conversation with one of our advisors, Rachel, and she's amazing, based in the UK. Amazing woman, and she's a sports lecturer, and she's our gender equality LGBTQ um, advisor, and she's amazing. And we were talking about what's going on in the United States today, and how, what, 2 days into the administration, like for weeks, I was feeling this cloud, this weight, but showing up, because I have to show up. You have to show
yeah.
up. It's like smile in the face of adversity, smile and wave. So, but now it's like a little bit of, you have to take your purpose and move forward, and not let what's happening around you make the, decide how you're going to show up, or what you're going to be. Someone made a comment, oh, well, you could rebrand your company because, sisterhood. It's about women, guys. It's about females. It's about sisterhood. It's about celebrating people from all walks of life. Yes, it's very important. But it's about saying, no, I'm not going to capitulate. And so I think that there is so much to that question. I hope
Mm.
that did that answer that for you?
Yeah, yeah, I think it definitely does, and it's a difficult one thing for all of us who are doing the work we're doing, to hold space for yourself, to hold space for the world. Sometimes it can become challenging. I find with myself, I'm like you, I take it a while to come down, and sometimes I will have to follow up with people that I've met if I've heard such a heavy story. I'm not one of those people who can just go to bed at night and be like, oh, it doesn't bother me. It will literally linger so long. And then I'll be like, I should ask them how they're doing. But some people, I think they don't necessarily understand it's that it just lingers with you, that you'll probably then message them a week after and be like, how did that thing go? Or is everything okay? But in my view, I don't think we have enough of that. And I still stand by that. I think we are very disconnected from our humanity at the moment, with everybody being very focused on obviously making a living and all the other crises that we have going on in the world. I do think we need to return back to humanity and connect back to ourselves. So I love that you're very connected. You have such a phenomenal story, and I feel like you need to come back for another episode, of course. But I would really love you to leave advice for young women and women in all walks of life. So maybe we can divide it up each decade, because I think there's so much wisdom there and not enough knowledge. I really love to know, like, maybe in your formative years, what advice would you give to yourself then, and then, in the next level and the next level? Because I think there's so much it's beautiful just looking back, right, at your younger self. And what would you say to the young Elizabeth, knowing everything you know now, and other young girls who are coming up in life, maybe unsure about their future? some aren't even sure if they want to get married, if they want to go into motherhood and things like that. So what advice would you leave for girls at all stages? Feel free to answer from whichever point you like
Well, I
to.
want to start with young Elizabeth, but I probably don't. I would say this to young women, not me, because I was this way. And I wasn't this way with a plan. I'm guileless that way. There was no agenda. I just marched to the beat of my own drummer. I mean, so what I would say to young women is like, do the work on self, like go into self at a young age, do the self-discovery work, gain as much a sense of self awareness of who you are, because that builds self esteem. Do things that will build self esteem, whether it's play sports or do activities that bring out your sense of self in a big way, that give you voice in whatever that way is. And so, what I would say is like start there, because if you start with those like foundational things as you age and go through every decade, you're going to have so much confidence and belief in self to show up. And what I would say is, and I can only say this based on my own experience, but my mother used to say, and I don't mean this in a religious way, but she used to say to me, "You plan, God laughs." But you
Yeah.
know what? I never planned. Aunt Annie said that too, but I was never a planner. Things happened to me. And so, what I would say to women of all ages is a little planning goes a long way, but I would also say, you know, being willing to pivot and know that the plan isn't the plan, might not be the plan, you know, and let things happen and unfold organically. But I think the constant threads at every decade of your life, I would suggest is I'd suggest a strong thread of work ethic, showing up every single day, do the work, do the work, do the work on self, do the work on the job, do the work in your community, be a good person, live in integrity. Doesn't matter what age you are. I believe in that. And for the most part, I would say from age 18 on, I lived in integrity. I mean, I was a little bit, got into a little bit of trouble when I was younger, but like the thing about having those certain things baked into who you are, and as you evolve over time, back to that comment around that scaffolding, that infrastructure, feeling
Mm.
good about self, because life is full of adversity. Every life stage, every decade, you're going to experience something that is going to challenge you. And what I would say is, and I used to say this to or I used to look at my children and say, how are they showing up in these adverse moments? How do I show up as a mother in challenging times or as a woman? And I think adversity shows you a lot about a person. So I think that if you start off at a young age having that strong structure, we know that leaving the house, the safety net of a home, and going off to college is a really challenging time, or going off into the working world where you're figuring out who you are. You don't have your community where you've come from, community you're leaving, and so finding community. And I think finding community is huge at every stage, and your communities will change. It doesn't mean that the people in your life from the past aren't important and haven't had so much impact on you. It just means that there's different seasons of life and different people come in and out. It doesn't mean you don't love them and value what you had with them. And so, but I would say, being that good person and that having that work ethic, and being committed to doing the right thing. And in terms of purpose, I think it's great if you can find your purpose going into college or coming out of it. You'll be very, very lucky. And then I say, follow that, follow your heart. I would say at every stage. And guess what? Your heart can change. It can change. It can be at one place at 20, at a different place at 40. And I think that, if you live through something that isn't following your heart and you're going through the motions, and I myself did that, that's really hard.
Mhm.
And when you're not at peace when you're doing that. So I think that life it's a long journey. And so, if you follow your heart, if you have built that strong scaffolding because you have a great sense of self-awareness of who you are, create those boundaries. And continuing to do the work all the time. One of the women I interviewed, Geraldine, wonderful woman, she used this quote. I forget who the quote's from, but I remember her quoting the quote: we are magnificent works of progress, or
Yeah.
works in progress. And so I think recognizing that, and for me, till the day I die, I'm going to be a work in progress and doing the work. And, as I said, I like the idea of not being so planned and so formulaic with your life, because that's when magic can happen
Yeah.
and things happen and you find yourself on that journey. But when you're in this very rigid thing, and I think it's tricky for women who have children like myself, having children, having three children. And so what, for my son was 6 years age difference from my daughter Georgia, it's like what? So it's like 24 years, if you will, that you have a more structured, formulaic life, because you're raising your family. There's certain just family systems and structures in place that you kind of follow, like going to school, education, all of that, separate of all the activities that follow, on top of working jobs and careers and growth, in that perspective. So I think there's a lot to be done there. But if you have a good infrastructure, if you have good scaffolding, because you've done the work, and you have a good sense of self along the journey. And as I said, the self will evolve. I'm sure that you understand yourself, Khanyi, different now that you, having been a lawyer and practicing law, and in the corporate space, going into this more spiritual space and finding self, But I think you're a great example of allowing life to unfold and finding your purpose and what makes you happy. And I think, I don't want to lessen, when you say what makes you happy, it can sound really trite, but I think when people feel that they are living a life of purpose, or finding their calling and finding joy in what they do every day, they're able to do it with such zest and show up in ways. And you could be, teaching a sport or what have you. And I use that as an example because my son's coaching right now, but it's the way you show up as a teacher, because you're able to impart life lessons, not just teach a skill, but show up in many different ways.
I love that. It is such a beautiful answer. Honestly, you've said so much, and I think it's going to resonate with so much of the audience. It's a different perspective, but it's one that's just much needed. As I always say, we never know what we need to hear sometimes. And even for myself, you've said a whole bunch of things that have really moved me today, and I really do appreciate them. We're about to close out the recording, but I would love for you to maybe share, what are you looking forward to at this point in your life? What do you see for yourself moving forward? And it doesn't have to be a business answer, although it can be. If you want to plug yourself, of course, go ahead. But if it's personal, business, whatever your goals are, what do you see for yourself?
Wow. So it's wow. Well, so it's really interesting. I think on my journey of self-discovery and finding out who I am, I think what I recognize is I really like living a life of purpose and following my calling, which is to be in service of other communities and really giving voice to them. So as I move forward, I want to scale it to make, as many other communities, women, the aging population, caregivers, BIPOC communities, LGBTQ plus, people living with disabilities. I want to give as many people voices, because when I feel like I'm doing that work, I feel like I'm able to show up and connect on a deeper level. And of course, as a mother, just, I think what's been really beautiful about this time of my life is being able to spend more time with my family, who might need me less. They need me differently. But it's great because we're connected in such really in deep and meaningful ways. But I tend to live really in the present now, which sounds crazy. It's very interesting. I think the pandemic taught us, they used to, as a business, come up with these 5-year plans, but with so many things that are so much uncertainty, you really can't plan. And so what I would say is, if I were looking forward, it's continuing to do this work in such a way and touch as many lives as possible, so they can touch as many lives as possible. And just to feel, because one of the things I think my through line is the creativity and the work ethic. As long as I can continue to creatively express myself with the communities I love, the people I love, I feel like I'm in the right place and doing the right thing. And I think the biggest thing I've been in search of for probably 7 years now is a real sense of peace and
Mm.
gratitude, and I'm living in that. So I would like continued peace. It's a hard time here, I'm not going to lie. So I think I have to create my own peace, and that's spending a lot of time in nature, and so I can heal during times that are very unsettling, and so continuing to do that. Yeah.
That's such a beautiful answer. Honestly, I love that you mentioned peace, and it's true. You know, they will say like peace is so expensive, but people don't realize that if it costs you your peace, it's too expensive. You know, that's nothing actually more valuable than peace. But I think it's a tough climb getting there. Maybe one that I don't know if I'll reach that point in this life, but I'll certainly try more meditation.
I
More
think you will reach it.
meditation.
I think if you're in search of peace, you'll reach it. I think you
Yeah.
will. And, I think, thank you for acknowledging that, because I think for me, um, because when you're at peace, it's not peace on a two-dimensional or three-dimensional level. It's 5D. It's like really going inward. It's like liking who you are, loving who you are, accepting who you are, accepting your the way you show up in the world, your
Mm.
how you show up externally, and it's accepting what's going on in the world and how you can be at peace despite some of the things that that would otherwise like to not have you at peace. So it's like it is a lot of
Yeah.
meditation, mindfulness, and nature and stuff like that to sort of help the central nervous system.
Yeah. I love that. We are closing out this podcast now. I know that you've said a whole bunch of beautiful things, but I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to say before we close out, or if you feel like you've said it all.
I think, yeah, no, I just think that this is a wonderful platform, and I'm so grateful to have this time with you, Kanye. Your questions, I think, were really, really rich questions, and brought out a lot of really neat qualities. I'm like, wow, I haven't thought of that. Like, because it forces you to reflect. So I want to say thank you for having me reflect, coming into this as a conversation, not knowing where it would go, but trusting you that it would go to a wonderful place, and then allowing me to share the different aspects of my life or my story. And hopefully it will resonate with women. What I would say is, being a woman is a wonderful, it's like it is the most righteous, it's the most wonderful thing that you could be or we could be. And celebrating it and understanding your power and owning your
Mm.
power and leaning into it would probably be a message I'd want to leave. And know as well that you're not going to be for everybody. You're not going to be for everybody, and that's okay.
Mm.
Being your authentic, unique self and loving self, I think, is more important than, we live in a world where, the more you manufacture and to be like others, it's, yeah, I don't recommend that. That will not be fulfilling. It will not take you, it will not be peaceful either. So,
I love when you say, you're not for everybody, because somebody once said to me, you know, you could look at a whole buffet of like ice cream and there'll be so many flavors there, yet somebody will still be lactose intolerant. So if they
mm,
can't eat ice cream, then don't expect them to like you either. So I like that little joke. Okay, well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time on the podcast today. It was great to listen to you. You shared so much wisdom with us, and I think everybody, both men and women, will definitely benefit from this conversation. Everybody, thank you for listening to another podcast episode from the Lantern. You will find us everywhere: Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. Please don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.
thank you so much for having me, Kanye. This has been a wonderful conversation, really rich. Thank you.